and welcome back to a very special episode of What the Forensics. You probably saw in our episode title, but we are celebrating our 100th episode, which is so
Yay!
exciting. So, my name is Rebecca for the 100th time, and I'm joined here again for the 100th time by Journey and Nicole. So, this week we're shaking it up a little bit, and we're going to be talking about some fun conspiracies. Each of us are going to be covering a different conspiracy and talk about some of the theories. So, just before we get into it, we just want to get some housekeeping out of the way. Please leave us some reviews or comments wherever you're able to. We love to read them. They help us out not only with the algorithm, but also figuring out what you guys are into. Also, make sure your apps are auto downloading. It helps us immensely. We can only see downloads, we can't see listens, and we really like to see our stats. We like to know that you guys are enjoying from all over the world. So yeah, just like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you can. If you're interested in this, again, it's the 100th episode, so if you're here now, then you probably like us. So that being said, we don't really have any listeners' discretions this week. So just enjoy the fun episode. We're going to get right into it. And I think I am first on the docket for my conspiracy.
I'll introduce you. I'll give you a little swap into it. So Rebecca will be teaching us first on, the Oakville Blobs, which I'm very curious about, because when I first heard that you were going to say Oakville Blobs, the town over from where I grew up is called Oakville. So I was like trying to rack my brain for stuff that happened in Ontario, remembering that this was very much not in Canada.
Yeah, my mom thought the same thing when I mentioned the Oakville Blobs. She was like our Oakville? And I was like,
no. A different Oakville. The exciting thing too, I will add, technically we've surpassed 100 episodes, which is super, super crazy and so exciting.
Yeah.
But this is our official episode number 100 and not like a part series. So almost 5 years we've been doing this, which is a little reflection, kind of crazy, 100 episodes.
A lot has changed in the past 5 years. It's pretty crazy. I don't know if any of us fully anticipated it going past COVID, but I'm so glad it did.
Yeah, me too. So for those of you listening that have listened to either all 100 or a couple of those, thank you. And for those who maybe are just joining on our 100th episode, welcome. We've been here a while. You should go check out our other stuff. We've been around. But yes, Rebecca, please let us know about these Oakville Blobs. I would love to learn more.
And I would love to tell you about them. Okay, so on August 7th of 1994, many citizens of Oakville, Washington were probably sleeping when a thunderstorm began at around 3 in the morning. There was a police officer who wasn't sleeping at the time. His name was David Lacey, and he was doing his night shift patrol when the storm had started. And so instinctively, as you do when it starts raining really hard, he turned on his windshield wipers so that he could see. But instead of wiping away normal raindrops, he was met with this weird slime that smeared across his windshield and made it just even harder to see.
Ew. Yeah. That's really yucky.
Yeah, so instead of water, what was falling from the sky were these strange, tiny, gelatinous blobs that were described to be no bigger than like a grain or half a grain of rice. So, like little transparent, blobby rice bits falling from the sky.
That's so weird. So not kind of like hail, but squishy and just goop?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like it pretty much looked like hail. The next morning, the town obviously was met with confusion when they woke up. And there was one Oakville resident that was interviewed. Also, just like little side note, David Lacey and Dottie Hearn are both the individuals that I've talking about, like their specific interviews. They were interviewed as part of Unsolved Mysteries, and they're the only interviews I can find of people who experienced the blobs. So some of this might be a little bit familiar to those who may have seen the Unsolved Mysteries episode. So just bear with me. But as I was saying, an Oakville resident whose name was Dottie Hearn, she retold her account of waking up the next morning to see the blobs. So She had said that she first went outside to feed her cats, as she did every morning, as she had some barn cats. They lived on like a very large farm, so it was pretty common to have like barn cats and things like that. But when she went out to feed them, she noticed that the ground was littered in this weird substance. She had said, quote, "It looked like hail, but when I touched it, it wasn't hail. It was a gelatinous like material," unquote. So it very much did look like hail. um,
Weird.
Later that day, Dottie was found unconscious on her kitchen floor by her children. After which she was, of course, rushed to the hospital. I'm not positive when she regained consciousness, if it was like at home or on the way to the hospital, but they did stabilize her. She did wake up. But she had told doctors that before she collapsed, basically the whole day after touching this weird rain, she said that she'd been feeling incredibly weak, dizzy, and confused.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Okay.
a little unnerving.
Yeah.
I've got so many questions.
So Officer Lacey, who was probably one of the first people to notice the rain, just given he was out and about at the time, he had also said in an interview that later in the day, like after the rain, he got, quote, "violently sick" and was having difficulties with his breathing. And then in addition to Dottie and Lacey's mysterious sudden illnesses, countless other residents were also reporting becoming suddenly sick with very flu-like symptoms that were including like nausea and vomiting, dizziness, and severe headaches.
Weird.
I didn't realize there would be like a physical component to this. Like I thought it was just stuff flying out of the sky, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
just weird, goopy,
Yeah.
gross stuff.
Yeah. Like, I'm sure
So-
you'll get to this, but was it radioactive? Or did they even
I will
test
get to
that?
it.
Okay,
They
okay.
did test it. They did test
Okay.
it.
I know I've got so many questions, but I don't want to like get too far ahead into
yeah.
what you're. Yeah.
It's fair. I'll get into the analysis quite shortly. So,
Okay.
So unfortunately, whatever was happening to the people with them getting sick, it also seemed to have unfortunately been affecting some animals. The smaller ones being more affected than the large. In the following days of the rain, people had reported that they were finding dead birds scattered across their properties. Some people reported that their dogs were getting sick. Their dogs weren't dying, like it was more larger dogs people were reporting getting sick. And Dottie Hearn's daughter, her name was Sunny Barclift, she reported that a few weeks prior to the rain, she had adopted a new kitten. It was a very healthy kitten, but it lived indoor outdoor with like the rest of the barn cats. And unfortunately, she reported that her cat had also died following the rain. That was the only confirmed report of a deceased pet from the rain, but just given people were finding dead birds and like dogs were getting sick and all this, I wouldn't be surprised if there were more
Yeah.
animals affected.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially at least just in the wilderness. I feel like
Yeah.
no one's monitoring them for the most part.
Yeah, like I don't
But-
think people are keeping up with like mice that might have eaten the rice
Yeah,
or
or like
the blobs.
yeah, like just squirrels and other wildlife. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wonder if an animal had eaten an animal that had passed away from these blobs, how that would affect them, or if it was only like it only affects you if you come into contact with it and it doesn't like have any like secondary effect. I don't really know what that's called, but
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
I do know what you mean as well, but I don't know if I don't know if there was like secondary transmission, because this mystery has a lot of a lack of evidence, despite the fact that a whole town witnessed it happen. So obviously, some people suspected that the blobs that just fell out of the sky might have something to do with people getting suddenly sick. Really, really fair theory for them to have.
Yep.
So within just a couple days of Dottie collapsing, her daughter Sunny went home to collect some of the samples of the blobs that were around their property. I think she had said like she took a couple samples from the porch and maybe like from their yard. And so she brought one of these samples to the doctors who were treating her mother so that they could kind of see if something it had something to do with it. And then she also sent a sample into the Washington State Department of Ecology to get it formally analyzed. And so we're going to talk about that sample a little bit later, just because there's a bit more events that happened before that.
Ooh.
So 2 days after the first rain, so August 7th was the first rain. Again, in the very, very early morning of August 9th, it happened again.
Weird. It being in the early morning makes me think it was almost like dew that you get on grass, but instead of dew, it's just blob.
It's just gelatinous.
Yeah. Like a Jello dew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone's pouring a packet into the clouds, flying by.
Right?
Also, side note, I don't think I've ever had to say the words blob, goo, gelatinous, and like gooey, like so much in my life. So on August 9th of 1994, residents were once again woken to the sight of a goo-covered world. The blobs looked the same as last time, but there was one really important difference, that nobody reported getting sick.
Oh.
Yeah,
That's really odd.
right?
Yeah.
So over the following 3 weeks, Oakville residents reported that they had another 6 gelatinous rainstorms, which happened over a 20 square mile kind of radius of like Oakville and the surrounding area. But for some reason, the only time people reported anyways getting sick was the first rainfall of the 8.
That's so odd.
I know, and it's a localized area. Like this wasn't happening anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird that it was just Oakville and that they only got sick after the first like rainfall.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And then it happened
Okay.
multiple times, and it was only over a 6-week period, and then never again. Like that's
Yeah, that's weird.
weird.
Yeah.
Do you know by chance how close the nearest town was? Like, are they kind of isolated? Or are they a pass-through town? Or like, did neighboring towns ever really?
I know
it
was a small town.
Do they have a history of weird events? Like, is it somewhere? Because you know how some spots just have like
there's
weird,
like a
weird
magnet.
events?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they weren't really known for that sort of thing. Although I will say the picture that represents them on Google Maps looks like a statue of Bigfoot. So that ties in.
Nice.
So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a small town, but there's like other small towns nearby, like Independence, Cedarville, Balch. So it's small, but not small enough that it should have been the only place that this happened, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the samples. I want to talk about those now, because what the heck are the blobs? As mentioned, Sunny had sent one of the samples that she personally collected to the Washington State Department of Ecology. I'm just going to refer to that now as the WSDE, where the samples were then analyzed by a team that was led by microbiologist and chemist Mike Osweiler. Another sample of the blobs was analyzed by the Washington State Department of Health, or the DOH, and this team was led by a microbiologist named Mike McDowell. I don't know where the sample that like the DOH came from. Sunny was not the one that gave the sample to the DOH, but it was just independently brought in, obviously, because more than one person were curious. And so independently, both of these tests were run, and they found similar but very strange results. So Osweiler from the WSDE had reported that the blobs contained what they believed to be biological material, stating, quote, "It didn't appear to be man-made and we couldn't identify it," unquote. And then he further explained that the blobs had appeared to contain multiple cells of various sizes, but none of the cells had a nuclei, which largely would have ruled out like eukaryotic species.
Yeah.
So then, so they found some cells without nuclei. They couldn't identify them. They don't look human or man-made.
Yeah.
McDowell from the DOH had stated that when they analyzed the blobs, they also found biologic material, but they were able to identify them. So there was 2 bacterias identified in the blobs. It was Enterobacter cloacae. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I definitely should have looked that up first. But this is a common gut bacteria that is sometimes also found in soil and water. And then there's also Pseudomonas fluorescens, which is a bacteria not from the gut that can be found in soil, water, and plants. And I don't think this is related. I just thought it was kind of cool because, like, the name of it, Pseudomonas fluorescens, part of the reason for that is because one of like the well-known attributes of this bacteria is that it is fluorescent. Like it looks, so it under certain conditions looks like it's glowing.
Cool.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah. So both of these bacteria found, they can technically cause illness in people, but it is considered uncommon, but obviously more, there's higher risk for people who are immunocompromised or people going invasive procedures at hospitals. There's some pretty serious side effects of these of infection of these bacterias. I didn't list them, but some of them include like I think rheumatoid arthritis was one of them. Not rheumatoid, but definitely arthritis. I need to look this up. But also like urinary tract infections, difficulty breathing, nausea. I believe the Pseudomonas fluorescens also in people who are immunocompromised can, in rare cases, cause death as well and organ failure. So
Oh my
it's not
goodness.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not common that people are infected with them, but it is possible and it can be dangerous if it happens.
And it's a little concerning when they're raining from the sky.
Yeah,
Supposedly,
completely
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
I'm also so intrigued by the Enterobacter cloacae or whatever, because a cloaca is like a chicken's like bum.
Yeah, I know, right?
I'm like, what does
was
that have
thinking
to do
that
with
too.
bacteria?
Yeah, I wonder because it's like a gut bacteria if that's why they named it that way. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But also weird that they found a gut bacteria in blobs from the sky.
Very odd. Very odd.
So mysteriously, when McDowell went to go retrieve the blob samples to continue testing them, because obviously before sending the finalized report to the government or to whoever they were sending it to, he wanted to obviously know more now that he has found potentially human bacteria in in this weird material. However, when he went to retrieve the sample from where they were keeping it in the lab, it was missing. It was nowhere to be
Oh.
And unfortunately, the WSDE couldn't conduct any more tests because they used up the whole sample in their own analysis.
Classic.
Well, that was dumb.
Classic.
Yeah. So no further tests have ever been conducted on the blobs besides, or ever any known tests, anyways, by those, besides the ones by those organizations. And no samples are known to exist today either. Like the samples that were tested were, and supposedly went missing, are the samples that we had.
I feel like
So-
if I was living in Oakville at the time, I would have like buckets and buckets of samples. You know?
Yeah.
Even
Me
just as like a
too.
civilian to gather because I'm like, this is weird. I should probably keep this in case something
Yeah.
we need to look further
Yep.
into it. Like I even
Yeah, or
remember
just-
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, even like just as a weird hoarder collector thing.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, I remember back in like June, many, many years ago, we got hail at my cottage, and it was like massive size hail. Put them in a cup and stuck it in the freezer, and it was like, why? I don't know, just because. It was after a couple of months where my dad was like, we should probably throw these out. I guess. Okay, yeah.
I guess.
I've never seen hail that big. I probably would have done the same.
Right in the middle of June too. It was just odd.
Yeah. That is
So,
odd.
I would have cups and cups of this stuff.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, no known samples exist anymore, which is really sad because this probably isn't going to happen again. And I really want to know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, even though there were numerous people that confirmed that these tests were in fact conducted, like the Mike McDowell, like with the DOH, and then all these people who were interviewed, a 2020 inquiry into the Washington State Department of Health found that they have absolutely zero record of any blob samples ever even existing or entering a chain of custody.
That's
That's weird.
suspicious.
Yeah.
Weird. And it's like a mass psychosis thing, but there's no way a whole town could all experience something like this, could they?
I don't
And
know. And then like
no
they say it
record.
happened on like 8 other occasions. And I feel like if people can corroborate like the 8 other occasions it
Yeah.
happened, like there's no way,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it also, like, even if a whole town does like mass hallucinate this, I feel like there's maybe something else going on that should be leaked into or looked into.
Yeah. So I'm not completely positive how to transition here, but that's the story of the Oakville Blobs. It was 8 times over the course of 6 weeks in August, June 1994. They tested them. There was some weird
Supposedly.
cells, some bacteria in them, and the samples went missing, and we have no record of them.
Okay.
So I want to get into theories.
Yeah, that's so odd.
Yeah, as is the case with like this weird sort of thing, there's a lot of theories about like what it could be. So I'm just going to go over like 3 or 4 of the really common ones. One of which being, which is a really common theory, especially for the time, was that the blobs were pieces of jellyfish.
Oh.
Okay. Journey and I were just kind of talking off camera that it reminded her of a whale incident where a town thought the best way to get rid of a dead whale was to blow them up. So we were
That's
like,
whack,
maybe
yeah.
like whale pieces coming down. We're like, I don't know if there's many whales in the area. But if there's like an ocean nearby, where is it in relation to an ocean? Could a
It
storm
is
have brought it?
It's about 50 miles inward from the ocean.
So
That
not
feels
as
too far to be
Yeah.
raining jellyfish.
yeah.
Also, I feel like if it was raining jellyfish, I feel like it would be kind of easy to test and compare the samples to the jellyfish. And if it was raining jellyfish, the samples probably wouldn't have just disappeared.
Yeah.
Well, I like how critical you're being. I have like pros, I guess, and cons to the theory.
Okay.
One of the challenges to the theory is that the cells that they found didn't have nuclei,
Yeah.
which rules out eukaryotic species, which jellyfish fall into.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that here's some of the reasons they thought it was jellyfish.
Okay.
So one, the blobs, some considered similar in appearance because they were like translucent and gelatinous. And then also apparently some residents were reporting that they were hearing about like, I think they're like rumors and like whispers and stuff like that. They reported that there were naval bombing exercises happening in the ocean of like along Washington state. And so that they hypothesized that during these naval bombing exercises, they basically blew up a shit ton of jellyfish into tiny little pieces and they got aerosolized and like take it up into the clouds basically where it remained and traveled with like airflow until it was heavy enough to precipitate, where it then precipitated over Oakville.
8 times.
8 times.
8
Yeah.
times.
8 times.
And only Oakville.
Yeah. It's the only Oakville part that I don't understand.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's
So
weird.
as you had said, Journey, like they can probably compare the cells if not jellyfish, which yes, like they're probably not jellyfish based on like the lack of nuclei. And then there was another kind of challenge to this theory, which was that all of the blobs were a uniform size and shape. Like they were all little like round blobs that were about like half to a full grain of rice in size. And if this was natural organic material that was blown up by a bomb and traveled, it's very unlikely that it would look so uniform.
Yeah. It's
Oh my
also,
goodness, that's even weirder.
Yeah. I'm also thinking back to the bacteria that was supposedly identified. That bacteria is like what, soil, human gut, and like dairy
Water, I
products,
think.
water and dairy products. But there's, just from what I can quickly see, there's no like, why would there be a link between jellyfish and this type of bacteria?
Yeah, right?
You saying that made me just think, like, what if they were using like a specific pesticide or something in this area that summer, that when it like evaporated and turned into rain or whatever through the soil and the water and however that process works, it caused some sort of reaction within the clouds to cause, like, but still doesn't make sense why only Oakville was using it and why that also wasn't put together, because I feel
Yeah.
like you'd be like, oh, this is the first summer we used Roundup Z.
Yeah.
And then,
Bam. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't dig into that theory, but that is actually a theory that it was
Okay.
like hazardous waste or like
Yeah.
misuse of like chemicals and stuff by like industries.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't quite get into it, but that very much was a theory that it was by like pesticides and fungicides and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So my next theory was that the blobs were actually just human waste that was dropped by an aircraft flying over.
Oh.
So technically speaking, this is a thing that can and has happened in the past where aircrafts have emptied their lavatories mid-flight. But
Yeah.
one, it's very uncommon
Yeah.
and also illegal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And like if it is done, then they usually at least try to do it over a non-populated area. But
Don't
it is
they-
very rare.
Doesn't it like come down in like brick almost, or like it gets frozen or something, and the way that it hits Earth isn't liquid, like it's a solid of some sort coming down?
Yeah, so I'm not
Could I be making that up? I feel like, I don't know.
I think I'm not 100%, but I definitely think you're on the right track because one of the things they nicknamed it is blue ice.
Yeah.
And it's because the disinfectant that they use in a lot of aircraft lavatories for like sanitization and stuff is like a bright blue color.
Yeah.
And so because of this, when it drops, that you would expect the waste from the aircraft to be either blue or brown because
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I think you're right. I feel like it would be somewhat frozen coming from that high up.
Because I just feel
Mhm.
like I've heard accounts in the past of things hitting people's houses and like breaking windows or like damaging their property, and then they go and get it tested, and they're like, this is actually human waste from a plane.
That's so
Ew.
fucked up.
Like,
That's
right?
so gross.
Right?
I can't imagine getting a hole in my roof and having to fix that and it was human poop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just burn it down. Start fresh. That's disgusting.
Yeah. Oh man.
So yeah, this was a theory that people did have, but like it's not super widely believed because again, like it's uniform, tiny, translucent
Yeah.
bits of goo, and aircraft waste is like
Not
blue
that.
or brown and should not be dumped, especially in such a uniform pattern over a city.
Yeah.
Yeah, 8 different times.
Yeah. Like
They're just targeting that city if that's the
the
case.
pilot has a huge vendetta against the city.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's also
Um,
weird going back to the testing. Sorry. Because did they only test the first round of bacteria or like the first round of blobs? Because
Like
those
the
are the
first
only ones
day,
that got
yeah.
people sick. So I wonder if the second to 8th round were like not like didn't contain or contain different bacteria that didn't make people as sick.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure about that. I didn't find anything that said they ever did any more tests besides
The
the
first
two
one.
that were mentioned.
Yeah.
Like I feel like there has to have been some Oakville resident with their own little at-home testing stuff because they were nerdy.
Yeah.
And like I can't help but think that was someone out there knows something. It was
Yeah,
only in
right?
1994. Like everyone is still alive from that.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, most of them. Okay, so a third theory, which honestly does sound kind of plausible, at least from what I've read about it, was that this was a natural phenomenon of algal blooms. Algal blooms? I didn't know how to say that word.
Comes from algae. Those ones.
Yeah. Blooms of algae or environmental mucilage, both of which can be present in a gelatinous kind of gooey form.
Hmm.
So algal blooms in particular can be lifted into the air by like particularly strong wind currents, and they can travel via the wind currents to other locations, and then like kind of whenever the wind dies down or changes, like it looks like it precipitates. So it is possible for gooey stuff to travel.
Hmm.
But one of the issues with this is that algal blooms travel during like windstorms, but the all of the blobs occurred during like rain and thunderstorms when there was like a heavy kind of like dew point and like precipitation point. So it's like unlikely that the algae would have traveled that distance in a thunderstorm.
Mm-hmm.
Another challenge to this theory was that there aren't any known natural materials that actually match the reported appearance, texture, and translucency of the blobs that rain down. So, like,
Hmm.
we know, I'm sure there's species of algal bloom that we haven't found, but to our collective knowledge of algal blooms and like environmental like mucinous, the blobs didn't look like anything we've ever seen before.
Weird.
Yeah. So again, that one's like kind of plausible and also not scary. It's like a natural phenomenon that happens once in a while. But the final theory I want to talk about kind of scares the shit out of me, but I'm also not surprised because the government is so good at being bad to people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so this last theory that I want to talk about is the theory that the blobs were a result of military testing of biological warfare instruments.
I love that you
Awesome.
mentioned this because that comes up in mine.
Really? That's so cool.
Something similar. Yep. Oh, yep. Okay.
That's cool. Tying things in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically this sounds somewhat possible because there was frequent Air Force activity reported by residents around the time of the blobs. Residents were reporting low flying military aircraft over Oakville, like before and after the blobs occurrences, basically. And also, Oakville lies near several military installations, which include the McCord Air Force Base. Also, there were multiple incidents over a short span of time and then never again. This is obviously unusual because if it was a natural phenomenon, it wouldn't have been such a uniform thing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were getting mysteriously ill, and there were animals getting sick and dying, and labs found biological materials in the blobs that we can't identify or is like, what the heck is it doing there? Another thing, Mike McDowell's samples disappearing from the Department of Health. That's
Yeah.
suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
Very suspicious.
Yeah, so like obviously to this day, the military vehemently denies that they had any operations involving the use of biologic materials in that area during the time, which I'm super unsurprised about.
Yeah.
I
I
yeah,
love
like
the clarification too of in that area at that time.
yeah,
You know,
right?
like, okay.
Like no, we did other weird stuff, but we didn't do it there.
It wasn't there, so it's not us.
So yeah, there's no actual concrete direct evidence to support this theory,
Yeah.
but there's so many like circumstantial evidence, like so much circumstantial evidence that lends credence to this theory. One of which being is that it's well known that the US government has conducted countless biologic material tests across America on their own citizens.
I didn't know
Um,
that. That is messed up.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad to be the bearer of bad news. Yeah. So yeah, since the beginning of the Cold War, the U.S. has conducted over 200 domestic tests of biological warfare. And they claim to have conducted all of this to assess the national vulnerabilities to biological warfare if we were to be attacked. That's what they claim. It's for
Of course.
us. It's
for
safe.
defense. It's always for defense to keep them safe.
So
Okay.
there's a really famous example of this occurring. It was in April of 1950. The U.S. government released clouds of apparently harmless bacteria off the coast of San Francisco, which exposed. Oh, sorry, that was in September 1950, not April. But it exposed almost all 800,000 residents of San Francisco to this bacteria. And despite claiming it was harmless, there were confirmed reports of numerous hospitalizations with infections of the bacteria. And there was one elderly man who was confirmed to have died after the infection of the bacteria reached his heart.
That's so scary.
Yeah.
Oh my
I don't
goodness.
like that they have the capabilities to do that. I've always been like, there's the conspiracy of like, oh, the government controls the weather. And I was like, no, that's so far-fetched. However, the fact that they can release clouds of bacteria is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's concerning. And it's definitely like, I really support this theory because the government holds so many secrets and it aligns so much with so many other accounts of them doing this to other cities.
Yeah.
But then there was one more challenge to this theory, which was that the bacteria that were found in the samples didn't match any of the known biologic agents used during military biowarfare testing. But that's not to say that they just haven't released that they have studied that bacteria. Like, I don't think it's a terribly strong indicator because there's plenty of stuff, again, that like they keep from the public for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's so weird.
Yeah, it's weird and it's scary. I'm like, please don't do that to me, Canada.
Yeah.
Please.
Right? Yeah, how about we don't test biological warfare out on your citizens or citizens of other countries? How about we just stay away from biological warfare?
Yeah.
I like that idea.
I don't like it.
But that's it, really. That is the Oakville Blobs and some of its theories. Obviously, there's some theories that include aliens are involved. That's just a given for every weird occurrence.
Every weird occurrence. Yep.
Yep. But yeah, I find them so fascinating and so weird. Just rain in general that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, could any of the atmospheric conditions affect rain droplets in a certain way to create that gelatinous material, or no? I feel like that's beyond how weather works.
I was
or we'd
looking
at least see more of it if that was the case.
Yeah, like we would expect to see more if it was like a natural phenomenon like that. Also, I looked at the weather forecast for Oakville, Washington, the day that it started, and it wasn't supposed to rain.
Oh.
Okay.
Interesting.
So that was a little weird. I don't know. Yeah, but that was
interesting.
Yeah, it's just like there has been. I totally had a slide about this. I don't know where it went, but there has been instances in the past of like non-rain things falling from the sky. Like in, I think it was the 1800s. I had the exact date, but it's gone now. But in the 1800s, there was something called the Kentucky meat shower when meat fell from the sky. Chunks of meat.
How did that happen?
I don't know.
That makes me so uncomfortable. Could you imagine going outside and it's raining meat?
Yeah, there was another similar one in the UK somewhere in 1950 where it rained live frogs.
I've heard of that one. I didn't think it was real, though.
Yeah, it's actually happened like multiple times throughout history. And basically the reasoning for it is like frogs are very light and small. And like when it's raining super duper hard and they live in the water and like there could be like those water tornadoes or whatever. And basically the wind sucks up the frogs and they're so light that like the windstorm is so strong up there that they travel with it until it dies down and then they just land wherever the wind stopped.
I can't imagine being a frog just getting sucked up in a wind tornado and then just being transported across the country.
I was just going to say, I was like, are they aware? Do they know what's happening?
Oh my goodness.
That's apparently so one woman reported like from the 1950 range. She said she was out for a walk and it started to rain, but she said it took her a second. She was like, wait a minute, like it's heavy. And she realized, she was like, the rain is squishy and it's soft. And she
Ew.
reached into her hair and she pulled frogs out of her hair.
Oh my
That's
gosh,
a lot of frogs. That's a lot
Yeah.
of frogs. Where are you picking up that
Yeah.
many frogs? Wow.
Right?
Oh my goodness. I think I would have a full-fledged mental breakdown if I pulled frogs out of my hair from the rain.
I think I was going insane.
Yeah. Like,
It
I
would
think
take
I
me a
would go home and
second.
shave all of my hair off.
Really? They're just frogs.
Yes, I think it would.
I
I
love
don't like
frogs.
frogs. They're
I would
yucky.
love that. Yeah. Meat,
Mm-mm.
on the other
Little King
hand.
Frog, he doesn't want to hurt you.
Yeah.
They're so cute, but I don't need them to touch me.
That's
And
fair.
I
That's
don't need
fair.
to touch them.
That's fair.
That's
You can admire from a distance.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're adorable and I love their little ribbits, but that's enough.
That's as much as they want.
Yeah. Oh my
That's
goodness.
crazy. Well, thank you for sharing, Rebecca. That's so
Mhm.
cool. I had not heard of that at all.
Mhm.
I'm glad actually, because it was an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and like ever since that episode came out in, I think it was 2020, it's so hard to find any other information because like now all of the sources that I'm reading are using that as a source, and I'm like,
Oh,
okay, but
yeah.
I want some different information.
Yeah.
Like the first
That's
info.
suspicious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so that was mine. And now I'm really excited to pass the microphone on to Journey. And Journey is going to be telling us about one of our most beloved cryptids, Mr. Bigfoot.
I love Bigfoot. And I think because you mentioned that Bigfoot was one of the pictures that shows up on Google Maps when you look up Oakville. And I think
I
that's
think
just
so.
because it was in Washington. Bigfoot is huge in Washington. Like, I think Bigfoot is like their state animal kind of thing.
Yeah, that feels
Like,
That's
right.
incredible.
When I went to Seattle, everything was like Bigfoot this, Bigfoot that, Bigfoot lives in Washington kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I think that's why.
I love that a lot. I would love to visit
right?
Washington.
It's yeah, and I would love to go like Bigfoot hunting almost. Bigfoot is someone or something, I don't know. I talk about him as if he's a real and a person and goes by he him pronouns. um, so Bigfoot is a cryptid that has been featured in American and Canadian folklore. And so a cryptid, for those of you who might not know, is just an animal or being whose existence is claimed by some people but lacks scientific evidence or proof of existence. There are so many. Researching this really filled like a hyperfixation hole in my heart, and it was so nice.
I love that for you.
It was really nice. So Bigfoot is generally described as a large, muscular, and bipedal man or ape-like creature. So bipedal just means he walks on two legs like a human. He's covered in black, dark brown, or dark reddish hair. His footprints have been claimed to be as large as 24 inches long and 8 inches wide, which is gigantic.
Mhm.
And his height is often between 6 to 9 feet, even though there have been sightings of some Bigfoot as tall as 10 to 15 feet. I also don't really know how you're estimating how tall this is. I've got a terrible height estimation ability.
Me too.
So take it with a grain of salt. Those who claim to have seen Bigfoot have described everything from a large upright ape to an actual hairy human being standing over 8 feet tall and just incredibly powerfully built and muscular.
Okay.
So this was cool. I didn't know this, but North American settlers have reported sightings during the late 1800s and into the 1900s, with the occasional findings of footprints, sporadic encounters, and even a few grainy photos and videos as we've kind of like evolved technology-wise. I will say a lot of those have been proven false. I remember it was a few years ago where there was like a photo or a video of Bigfoot that was like shook the Bigfoot community, and then everyone was so devastated when it found out to be like a farce, and everyone was so upset by it.
Yeah. I find the photos that we have of Bigfoot are so grainy, you can't see anything despite technology advancements, or they're so clear that they're very much doctored.
Exactly. Yeah, there was one I saw of Bigfoot like climbing over this like giant cement median on a highway, and I was like, that's so obviously like a bear.
Just the wildlife crossing. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, Bigfoot, from what I know about Bigfoot, he doesn't like crowds. That's why we don't know he's real or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why he's a cryptid.
Yeah.
Exactly. Him walking on the side of the highway makes me think that maybe it was a bear.
Yeah.
That being said, entire organizations exist to study and document Bigfoot and work to prove its existence. And so these groups will regularly search the northwest of the US woods, kind of looking for him. However, like I just said, a lot of the sightings and evidence, I believe, are just bears.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they would look quite similar to the untrained eye.
Especially up on their hind legs, kind of.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, because bears are so tall.
Yeah.
So tall and far away, like through the woods, you're not getting a clear image.
Yeah.
And as we know, eyewitness accounts are rarely reliable.
Yeah.
And so some people believe that Bigfoot is the descendant of Gigantopithecus, whereas other people think it descended from prehistoric hominids such as Neanderthal man or Australopithecus. So I think it's just kind of explaining whether or not he looks more apey versus more human-like.
I've never heard of Gigantopithecus, and I'm sorry. I had to look up that word because it is so fun.
Me too.
I'm pretty sure he's not real.
It's an extinct genus of ape, apparently, from a quick Google. I thought that was like gonna be a term for just a literal giant or like some other
too.
mythical being, not
Yeah.
an extinct ape.
Yeah, I think I learned about him in one of my
2 million to 100,000 years ago.
Yeah, he's
World's
a big boy.
largest primate.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a big boy. So I think
He's a big boy.
I learned about him in one of my primate classes. It was super boring but interesting, and somehow the class that I retained the most information from, which is annoying.
It always goes that way.
Yeah.
I know, it was awful. But anyway, so we have no proof of anything, and for all we know, Bigfoot has just been bears mistaken for people.
Yeah.
According to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization.com or .net or whatever it is, Bigfoot hasn't had a recorded sighting since December 2021 in Canada, since 2002 in Australia, and since 1989 in Russia.
I didn't know Bigfoot was a worldwide man.
Yes, he goes by different names, and I kind of talk about some of them because I didn't know that either.
That's so fun.
But do we think Bigfoot is a singular entity, or do we think there are multiple Bigfoots?
There are multiple Bigfoot.
Yeah, I think there's a
Big
family
feet.
of big feet. Yeah.
Yes. I think that there's communities of Bigfoot
Yeah.
people, individuals, big feet, who kind of live in the forest. And then I think the whole hasn't been sighted in Russia since 1989 is because that Bigfoot in Russia has a different name.
Yeah.
And Bigfoot in Australia has a different name. So they wouldn't, if you call them Bigfoot. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I don't forget where I was going with that.
Miscommunications with that, yeah.
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 So that's why it's been such a long time since anyone's seen Bigfoot in Russia, is because they've been seeing the Yeti.
That's fair.
This website was actually kind of fun to poke around on. It does definitely look like you are going to get a virus if you click any of the links. Not a lot of the links work. So you can go on the sightings, and then you can click last reported or whatever, and you click on it, and then it'll have a list of newspaper articles of the reportings.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was really neat. So you can kind of look more into it. And one of them, the 1989, or not in 1989, but in Russia, there were articles that talked about a 6'6" Russian ape woman from the 1800s who was quote unquote not human. And so her name was Xana, and she was found and caught by a hired group of hunters in the region of Okamshir in the Republic of Abkhazia in the 1850s. This whole story is ethically and morally questionable. She was eventually, quote unquote, tamed by a nobleman on his estate in Tikhina. Apologies for any pronunciations. But yeah, so she like was basically just this almost like circus attraction that this rich guy was like, I need.
Mhm.
And obviously, quite a few years later, a professor from Oxford performed DNA tests from 6 of her living relatives and a tooth from her son, because apparently she had 4 kids from 4 different local men during her life,
Oh
which
wow.
is super questionable
Who's
because if
procreating with this?
yeah, it doesn't sound
Well,
consensual. It sounds
yeah,
super icky. It
yeah,
makes me super
yeah,
uncomfortable because
yeah, yeah.
like yeah. Anyway, she had
Very
4
likely
kids.
wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like if you have to talk about taming her,
Yeah.
this DNA analysis revealed that she would have been, quote unquote, 100% African, but didn't resemble any known group. So this
Oh, that's
Professor
interesting.
Sykes, yeah, I also, the whole thing just felt, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Sykes said that her, quote unquote, unparalleled DNA refutes the theory that she was a runaway Ottoman slave. And he believes that her ancestors came out of Africa from over 100,000 years ago and lived in the remote Caucasus mountain region for many generations, which is questionable for so many reasons.
Mhm.
But also, why was she the only one ever seen and caught?
Mhm.
Yeah, like it's interesting that also it's so sad that they thought this one was a Bigfoot and she was just from Africa and she just happened to be in Russia when she was captured. That's
Yeah,
really
like
fucked up.
she was just a
But
tall, hairy black woman. Like, that doesn't make you Bigfoot.
Yeah.
yeah, that's messed up. It is strange though that that like she didn't supposedly match any known group based on her DNA and like resemblance. That's interesting though.
What was the
Yeah,
data set like at the time, though? Because this was in the 1800s, was it not?
this was the 1850s, but Professor Sykes was in 1900s, I believe. He comes up again later.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I like,
Is he
and I don't know what he means by didn't resemble any known group, but yet she would have been 100% African. Like, that feels kind of almost like an oxymoron to me. Like, how do you
Yeah.
know where she would be if she doesn't match anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if this was done like right after DNA analysis became so common. And so, like you were saying, Nicole, like, okay, we know this genome is from Africa, but we haven't collected genomes from every subgroup yet because
Mhm.
it's so early in
Mhm.
DNA.
Yeah. I probably should have looked more into her because I just Googled her name and it's like DNA explained genetic genealogy, and then she shows up. I wasn't able to find any pictures of her really, but I know that there's not, like, it's not uncommon for people to have like unusual hair, I guess. Like, we hear of like the
Mhm.
dog woman in circuses and stuff.
Mhm.
It's so sad, all the people at circuses in those times.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like that's just a whole other episode.
It really is. Yeah. I'll put a link to this DNA website because it kind of breaks it down and goes more into it, which I should have actually gone into, but I didn't. But yeah, I'll put that in our sources on our website and stuff. But anyway, reports say that she was super athletic and powerful, and she would sleep outdoors and run around naked until she died in captivity in 1890.
Captivity, that's fucked up.
That's
Well, I say captivity because
She was taken. She was taken. She was
they took her,
tamed.
yeah.
she was essentially a captive.
Yes.
Yeah. She was
She
essentially
was. She was
a
a
slave.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was there for that rich man's entertainment, in a sense.
Exactly.
But yeah, so there are many cryptids called Bigfoot found throughout the world, as I've kind of alluded to, although it's most commonly used to describe the North American Sasquatch. However, some other Bigfoot-esque cryptids include the Almas, which is a cryptid that lives in the Asian mountain regions of Pamir and the Caucasus, as well as the Mongolian mountain range of the Altai.
Hmm.
So it was thought that this Xana girl was possibly an Almas, but she didn't match whatever. There have been reported sightings of them as far back as the 15th century, which
Oh wow.
is crazy. And there is a theory that people from the small village of Yazula in the Altai Mountains have Almas DNA, which gives them superhuman sight.
Oh, that's cool. I want someone to test their DNA.
Right. I'd like to look more
Yeah.
into that. The next one is the Hibagon, which is the Japanese version of the Sasquatch. And so they live on Mount Hiba in Hiroshima Prefecture, and they're between 4 to 5 feet tall. So they're more of like a small foot because they're just little. And they are very ape monkey-esque versus like human.
Okay.
Momo is short for Missouri Monster, who is a Bigfoot-esque thing with a large pumpkin-shaped head, a very furry body, and hair covering the eyes that lives in Missouri. So it's almost like if Cousin It was
That's
Bigfoot.
interesting. Yeah, Bigfoot's weird cousin.
Exactly. I really liked the art of the Missouri Monster. It was really cool. And then we have
because
they're kind of cool. And then we have the Batutut, which is a hominid cryptid that inhabits the Vu Quang Nature Reserve and other areas of Vietnam, Laos, and northern Borneo. We have the skunk ape, which is a bipedal hominid living in Texas, Georgia, Louisiana, and most notably the Florida Everglades. It got its name from its absolutely horrid smell. And interesting, one kind of feature about Bigfoot, I don't think all Bigfoot have this, but a lot of them have like glowing eyes, like the reflectors that like cats and dogs have, which isn't a characteristic of a primate or a human. So that kind of separates it out a little bit.
That's cool.
Then we have, yeah, right? It's really neat. And then we have the swamp stalker of Boggy Creek, which is a large brown humanoid cryptid thing that lives near, I think it's Fouke, Arkansas, and it looks very similar to the Missouri Monster. And so it has made major news, and tracks have been found. It has attacked humans and has been the inspiration for 5 films.
Damn.
The tracks that have been found are only 3-toed. And so a lot of people are like, 3 toes doesn't give you the balance to support someone of this stature.
Oh, okay.
So they call that into question. Then there's the Yeren, which is a cryptid that inhabits the remote mountainous regions of China and is a possible relative of Gigantopithecus again. And then we have the Yeti. I love the Yeti.
Me too.
Right? I don't know why.
I think of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's the Abominable Snowman, but he's a Yeti.
Yeah, yep. I have Yeti, aka the Abominable Snowman, that are most often found in the Himalayas. They are not white, contrary to popular belief, and they have been seen in the Himalayas since 6th century BCE.
What?
Yeah. Wow.
What would their name have been for them, though? Or did they call them a Yeti way back then?
I have no idea.
Because there's a lot of things they probably hadn't known that we kind of know now. So I'm curious to see like what they thought it was or what it was, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Especially with how much like I feel like animals have changed since then, maybe. Like
just evolution consistently occurring.
Yeah. Not that it was like an insanely long time ago, but it's still like over 2,000 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Professor Sykes, a geneticist at the University of Oxford, announced that 2 pelts said to belong to the Yeti matched DNA from an ancient polar bear. However, his theory is that Yetis are a bear species that is unknown to science and has a particular blend of ancient polar bear and brown bear DNA.
Where did he get these samples from? How does one acquire a Yeti pelt sample?
It said in the article, and I don't remember, but there were 2 different pelts from 2 different areas. And so he took samples and compared the genomes of the DNA to every single genetic code ever published. He later found that the samples each had a 100% match with a fossilized jawbone of a prehistoric polar bear found in Norway. And so it's thought that this primordial giant lived between 40,000 to 120,000 years ago. And this was before polar bears and brown bears separated into distinct species, which is why it matched both ancient polar bear and brown bear DNA or whatever.
That's neat.
It is really cool. I think his explanation of it being a Yeti and not just an ancient polar bear or some sort of polar bear descendant
Yeah.
is interesting for a geneticist who works at Oxford.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway, the last one I'm going to talk about is the yowie. And so this is a fanged humanoid marsupial or great ape that is featured in Aboriginal mythology along with Australian raptors, bunyips, and the Burundjur. I didn't look into any of those things. They sound pretty cool. And it is described as the most aggressive Bigfoot species, as it has been reported tearing off heads of kangaroos and dogs. And there have been rare reports of it actually attacking humans. So this yowie is just mean.
Not a good guy.
Not a good guy. And there were 3 sightings of the yowie in 2021 and 6 in 2020, all in the state of Queensland, which I thought was kind of interesting.
I wonder if it's just like a large man going through psychosis that's terrorizing Queensland. In the end, like, you know what I mean? And everyone's like, "Oh shit, it's the yowie!" Like it's something else.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I
I feel
don't
like
really
there's
know.
always kind of an
possible.
explanation to stuff, but
Exactly.
you never know.
Yeah. So those are the Bigfoot. Pretty much. I didn't really get too much into them. I didn't really know where to go with them because I feel like Bigfoot is kind of something that everyone has like a little bit of knowledge on.
Mhm.
And since it's a cryptid and we don't know it existed, we can't really talk about any of the disappearances that have been quote unquote a result of the Bigfoot.
Linked.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's pretty much all I had. I did have some stuff on like mountain portals and stuff, but for sake of time, I'm not going to talk about it. Also because it's very woo woo. But an interesting thing to talk about. I saw a TikTok on it. This guy's like, I found a portal hiking in the woods. And then I looked and his name is the Bigfoot File. So I think he goes out to hunt Bigfoot. And then he came across this portal.
I love that for him.
Do you want to briefly go over how the like portals may play into the Bigfoot conspiracy or like theory, or is it like a whole separate thing?
There's just a theory that all the people who go missing in the national parks, like some of them have been linked to or attributed to Bigfoot kidnapping them so that they can be a part of their Bigfoot community or whatever Bigfoot needs them for. And then there's there's many other theories. This one specifically is like you walk through this portal. So this portal can be the one the guy showed is just 2 trees that are close together, so they look like you're walking through a doorway, and you get this really weird feeling energy kind of around it. And he's like, "This is a portal. If I walk through this, I'm going to disappear."
Oh.
And there's
Did
been
he walk
stories.
through it and disappear?
He didn't walk through it and disappear.
See,
he did like
He didn't want to disappear. He has
you-
a following now.
You can't.
I know.
You can't do
I
that.
was
You
like,
can't. Do it
everyone
for
wants him
science.
to. So like he's gone back to it a couple times and like thrown things through it, and it just lands on the other side.
The energy needs to be right.
Yeah, it's right
but
time.
he can feel the energy. And then there's been stories of people who are like skiing. Like there's this one story of these 2 girls who were skiing and they kind of got off the track a little bit and all of a sudden there was like a doorway kind of in front of them that just looked like glass plates, like glass tiles, sorry. And it was really odd. And then the one girl supposedly stuck her foot into it and it disappeared.
Her foot?
Yeah, but then she took it out and it came back. Like it was like it was very odd. There was also a story of a Toronto firefighter who disappeared while skiing in New York. And he disappeared skiing in New York to reappear 6 days later in Sacramento, California, across the country with no memory of how he got there. So a lot of people think that he went through a portal.
It was a portal.
Because he was still in his ski clothes, had no memory, like very, very weird.
That is weird.
Yeah.
And still in his ski clothes.
Yeah. And like his only real memory of it is like he kind of woke up in Utah, I guess, and asked this truck driver, like, where are we? And he's like, Utah. And then the next time he was conscious was California.
That
which
is
odd.
so weird.
Was he with people?
Like he was with people
skiing?
at the skiing.
What did
But
they
then
have
he
to say?
went to his car to get his cell phone, and
Oh,
something
so
happened.
he wasn't even like skiing down the slope as he disappeared.
No, he just went to go get his cell phone. I don't think he ever made it to his vehicle and then woke up in California.
That seems like a trafficking situation of some sort.
Yeah, it feels like perhaps he got kidnapped a little bit, but it's weird that
It's
there were
strange,
no
definitely
injuries.
strange. Yeah.
Like he was still in the same clothes. They didn't attempt to change the way he looked at all.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? He could be
That is
lying.
super strange.
Like, it's very, very odd. But yeah, so those are the portals.
Does Bigfoot own the portals, or is that just like
No,
they know
there
where
was-
all the portals are?
There was really no tie-in other than they were like,
In the
this is
woods with
another
them.
explanation for the missing people. And then there's like
That'd be pretty neat though if all the Bigfoots did have this community and they're like, we know where the doorways are.
They're the
right?
keepers.
Like, that's like how they get to each other. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why
That'd be
they're so
cool.
elusive.
Yeah. And so it's very much just like a missing 411 thing where like people who go missing in the woods show up like an impossible distance away, or they
Mhm.
have got falling injuries and there was nothing to fall from. A lot of people think that these portals will explain that. One person thinks that giant eagles explain that. That's a fun story. I will put that Reddit story on our website. It was quite a read. You can choose whether or not to believe it. I thought it was hilarious. But yeah, so that's Bigfoot and portals.
That's so fun. Thank you. I didn't actually know about like some of the other Bigfoots that you mentioned. I've heard of them before. Didn't realize they're kind of considered like a subset of Bigfoot. Like that's neat.
Yeah.
I love that. Cryptids are so fascinating.
They're so
love them.
fascinating.
I've been crocheting them lately. It's a good time.
I love it.
Also, just briefly before we move on, we should do an episode about like missing 411 cases. I think that would be really interesting.
I agree. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much, Journey. I love talking about Bigfoot and cryptids and all these things that we may never be able to confirm, but it's really fun to speculate.
Exactly. It was really fun to research and just be like, I can take this information as it is. It holds zero weight. It hurts no one if I believe it.
Yeah.
It's fun to research. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's the harm if you believe in Bigfoot?
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move on to our final conspiracy of today, led by Nicole. I've heard a little bit about this, and I know it's just bizarre.
It's
so
so
I'm really
strange.
excited.
It's so
yeah,
strange.
so I'm really excited to get into it. So Nicole, do you want to tell us about the Dyatlov Pass?
I would love to. I will say there is some people who die in this. So unlike the other ones, like there is some discussions of that and some discussions of how the bodies were found. But I would say nothing more extreme than some of our other episodes and just conversations about it. But this was 10 experienced ski hikers. It was 8 men and 2 women. They set out in 1959 to embark on a 14-day expedition in the northern Ural Mountains in Russia. And so they left on about January 27th, 1959. And their end goal was Mount Atorton, I think it was. It was a 1,182 meter mountain. And I will say there's a lot of Russian names in this. I'm going to try my best to pronounce them, but if I incorrectly pronounce, I apologize. But this route at that season, it was estimated to be what they call a category 3 route, which is like the most difficult out of them. And so from my understanding, all of them had at least experienced category 2 routes with the leader, Igor Dyatlov. I've been saying Dyatlov. I don't know if that's the proper pronunciation, but Igor had previously completed a category 3. So it's not like they didn't have any experience. They were just going out on a whim. It's like they've done these hikes before.
I'm curious what dictates the difference between levels. You know what I mean? Like, at what point does a level 2 turn to a level 3?
Right? I don't know. That is an excellent question. So those on the expedition included 21-year-old Yuri Doroshenko. There was 20-year-old Ludmila Dubinina, 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, and he was kind of like the leader of the group. There was 24-year-old Alexander Kolvatov, 22-year-old Zenaida Kalmogorova, 23-year-old Yuri Krivonishenko, I want to say, 23-year-old Rustem Slobodin, 23-year-old Nikolay Thibo-Brinal, sure. I apologize deeply. I tried looking it up. I don't have any Russian friends to help me with these. Then there was a 38-year-old in there. This was Semyon Zolotaryov and 21-year-old Yuri Yudin.
That was a bigger group than I expected.
Yeah. So most of them were either current students or graduates of one of the polytechnic institutes in the area. And they were all, like I said, experienced in long ski tours and mountain expeditions. So mid-journey, though, one of the hikers, this was 21-year-old Yuri Yudin, he ended up falling sick. So in one of we actually have their notebooks from the expedition. In one of the journals, apparently his sciatic nerves were flaring up, and so he just couldn't continue and wasn't in the right state to do so. So he had turned
sciatic nerve pain is no joke, and I can imagine that would be a pain in the ass if you're skiing
on a category 3 expedition too. Oh yeah, that was a good call on his part.
Absolutely.
But then the remaining 9 ended up carrying on for their trip. And it was agreed beforehand that Dyatlov would send a telegram to their sports club as soon as they returned from the hike, just letting them know that everything was okay. This was expected no later than about February 12th. However, Dyatlov did anticipate that it could take a bit longer. And it's not fairly uncommon given like how difficult the excursion was, the weather and whatnot. Like sometimes these get extended by a couple of days. So when February 12th came and passed, there was no immediate reaction or worry from everyone else. But it was the relatives of the hikers. They ended up demanding a rescue operation after a while because they hadn't heard anything for a week and a bit after that. So on February 20th, the head of the institute had sent their first rescue group, and this was composed of volunteer students and teachers to go look for these 9 hikers, these ski hikers. But
they didn't use like search and rescue? Just volunteers? Okay.
It started with volunteer students and like civilians, but then army and police forces later became involved in the search, and they ended up employing like planes and helicopters, actual search and rescue kind of initiatives. But 6 days after this search began, the hiker's tent was found abandoned and badly damaged. So the student who had found the tent had described it as, quote, half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind, end quote. And so, yes, okay, this is, you are not ready for how strange this is. So through forensic analysis, they ended up determining that the tent had been cut from the inside, and it was cut near where the campers would typically like place their heads or sleep in that tent. And it was presumably a knife. It was something sharp with a weapon. So yes, cut from the inside out, and their belongings and shoes were found in the tent. It was also reported that 8 pairs of skis were found at the bottom of the campsite, with one of them supposedly like sticking up in the snow. They found 9 backpacks with various personal items that had jackets placed over them. There were clothes, food, and 9 pairs of shoes also found along with their itinerary, notebooks, documents, and a camera, along with just miscellaneous stuff. And the really cool thing is that the camera ended up being developed. So we have all of the photos they took from their expedition up until that point, and all of their notebooks and itineraries were collected. So we have all of those journal entries, which is
so cool.
Really, really cool.
Yeah, that's super neat.
And so there's a website, and you can look at all of the different photos that are posted. So you have every photo on the case for research, like expeditions, rescues of the bodies, which is kind of scary. You've got case files, you've got autopsy reports, diary entries, search information, you name it.
Wow.
That is so cool. I'm looking at some of the pictures
Yeah.
now. That's so cool. Like even ones of them like on top of the mountain.
Yeah, right? So yeah, all of these photos are accessible and available online, which is really, really cool. And it was said that Dyatlov's flashlight was found on top of about 10 centimeters of snow. And I'm unsure if it was on the canvas of the tent or kind of beside the tent, but it was found in the area and it was still in working condition when rescuers recovered it. They also found money and train tickets in the tent and later on the bodies. But because of this, the investigators thought it couldn't really have been a form of maybe a robbery gone bad or just like criminals in the area doing who knows what, because you would kind of anticipate that to be taken or stolen from them. But they still had all of their possessions on them or in the tent. They also found a single file chain of footprints of 8 or 9 sets of footprints left by several people who were wearing socks. One person had a single boot on, or they were barefoot, that could be followed down from the tent towards the edge of a nearby woods. But after a short distance, these tracks had been covered up with snow. So it was a very organized line of footsteps leading away from the tent, which I find fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That's weird.
And I don't know how true this was, but supposedly it had been determined that the taller men of the group were walking at the back. I'm not 100% sure the science behind figuring that out, but that's just information that's floating around. Upon further investigation, remnants of a makeshift fire were found at the forest edge under a large cedar tree, and its branches had been broken off 2 to 2.5 meters up the tree. Some sources say 5 meters up, but I think generally 2.5 meters, almost as if they were like cutting it down or trying to climb up and they broke, but all of the branches around up to that point were just off the tree. They found charred socks, a charred balaclava, and a shirt with money found by the fire. And the bodies of Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko were found about a meter away from the fire next to each other, both almost completely undressed. They did have some light clothing on them, but it was not what you would expect to be out in like -20 snowy conditions on a mountain.
Yeah.
Weird.
Right?
Yeah.
So Krivonishenko was found face up with a piece of his knuckle missing, which was found in his mouth, and skin on his lower left leg had been torn off. He wore a shirt, he had torn pants on, and his right foot was bare, with his left foot having a torn brown sock on it. Doroshenko beside him, he was found lying face down with broken branches underneath of him. He had a shirt on, blue shorts, blue underwear, like long blue underwear over top, and then those were torn. And his ear, nose, and lips were found to be bloodied. And it was believed that the bodies had been moved after death, given that the livor mortis present and the position of the bodies were found in didn't quite line up. So,
interesting.
like for one of
Weird.
them, I can't remember which one it was, but it was like livor mortis was either found on their back or front, but they were found in the opposite position. So you would expect,
Oh.
yeah, right? Kind of strange.
Very
Kinda
Yeah,
odd.
that is weird. Also, found with his own knuckle in his mouth?
Yeah, just the skin. So not like the actual,
Just
yeah,
skin.
but still.
Yeah, but still.
And I don't
Yeah.
know, my initial thought thinking that it was like maybe you're so cold, you're like holding your hand up to you, shivering, but it's also the back. So I don't know why that would be the case.
Yeah. The only
And like
thing
if
I can think of is if he was like I was thinking like finger knuckle, if he was like biting down on it for some reason for like pain.
my understanding
Yeah,
was like
maybe.
his metacarpals, like
Okay.
Oh.
Interesting.
knuckle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's odd.
But pain, that was kind of like my other assumption too, was like trying to prevent, I don't know, not take it away, but take
You
his
just
mind off of
distract.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But about 400 meters away from them, Igor Dyatlov's body had been found, and another 500 meters away, Zenaida Kolmogorova's body was also found. And so Dyatlov was found lying face up, clasping the trunk of a small birch tree. He was dressed but shoeless, and there were no external injuries found upon the examination. And his watch had stopped at 5:31.
Oh, that's interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. The watch information comes up a little bit, and I still don't know really what to make of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 'cause I know like old watches you had to like wind them
Mhm.
every day, didn't you? So like that potentially could be something. I don't know.
I don't know. There's a lot of strange things with this case. Kolmogorova, she was found wearing a wool cap, some clothing, and socks, but no shoes. Her face was bloodied and had an abrasion and bruise near her waist, which was described to resemble almost like being made from a baton. So it was like thinner in nature, maybe a stick, maybe a branch, I don't know, but it did appear like being hit with a long cylindrical object.
Mm-hmm.
From the position her body was found in, it initially seemed as though she was trying to get back uphill towards the tent, just the way that her legs and her hands were, and her arms were positioned. But it was also noted that another explanation could be that she was rather just trying to hold her position in place. Maybe if there were strong winds, she was just trying to brace herself in that position against the hill. But all three of their bodies were found in a straight line from the fire to the tent. So they were like, their head and their
Weird.
feet were all facing the same way, and they were found in a line from one another.
Weird.
That's super bizarre.
On March 5th now, Rustem Slobodin's, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, his body was found near or under, a layer of snow in a semi-similar dynamic pose as Kolmogorova. He dressed relatively warmer. He had one felt boot on. The other boot, though, was found in their tent. And his autopsy revealed he had several minor abrasions to his head. Blood was coming out from his nose. He had abrasions to his neck, graze wounds to his shin, and about a 1.5 centimeter skull fracture. However, this was deemed not to be lethal. Like, it wasn't a fatal fracture, but it was something that was present. And
Right.
his watch had stopped at 8:45.
Spooky.
The cause of death for these initial hikers was determined to be due to cold temperature and hypothermia. However, the medical forensic examiner also concluded that the cause of death was violent and accidental, however.
Very fair.
Yeah.
But hypothermia was very much the reason for the cause of death, determined after some time. And while they all had some form of abrasions, these were generally described to be from a blunt instrument and the result of a fall and injuries on rock, snow, and ice on the initial investigations. But the search ended up being put on pause at the time because of difficult search conditions. It was the middle of March, snow was terrible, the wind was not great. It just wasn't conducive for a efficient and effective search. So it was put on pause. The remaining bodies had been found months later on May 5th in the ravine, only about 50 meters from the cedar tree where the other bodies had been found.
Oh, wow.
They were found under 4 to 4.5 meters of snow at this time. Granted, months had passed, so they had probes, and that's how they had been searching, as they were probing the snow to see if they could find anything. These 4 were better dressed, but it was said that they were wearing the clothes of other hikers in their group. So they weren't wearing their own clothing. And I guess one of the ways that this was determined too was Yuri, the individual who ended up leaving mid-trip. He was kind of a key source in helping identify what belonged to who, because he had spent time with them and was semi-familiar or more familiar than the other research or rescue parties.
I feel like Yuri really escaped like a Final Destination type situation.
Mhm.
Definitely, 100%.
It also makes me wonder if he that was his
Knew something.
alibi and he followed them up
Mm.
after, but was like, no, sciatic pain.
But like, that's 9 people. Like, do you think he killed them or he just was in on something?
I have no idea. This case is just weird. But it does seem suspicious that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Nikolai was wearing Ludmila's fur coat and hat. Ludmila was wearing a brown sweater that tested radioactive and was most likely Krivonishenko's. Zolotaryov had Doroshenko's hat on, and Alexander Kolvatov was wearing Doroshenko's overalls. Supposedly, the waistband of his sweater and the lower part of his ski pants also tested positive for radiation. So those pieces were also radioactive.
That's weird.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Nikolai Thibault Brignol, I'm just going to call him Nikolai. He had major skull damage, and the ME concluded that his death was due to a skull fracture as a result of a great force with the subsequent falling, hurling, and concussion. He, for some reason, was wearing 2 watches. One showed 8:14, and the other had shown 8:39.
Oh, that's odd.
Yeah. Alexander Kolvatov, he was found with no eyebrows. He had missing skin around his eyes missing skin around like his eyes and eyebrow region, exposing the facial bone. And he had a wound behind his right ear and an oddly twisted neck. The ME noted that Yep. The ME noted that his death was due to low temperature and cause of death was through violence and accident.
That feels like he gave him 3 causes of death. Like, I feel like you have to pick one.
Pick one, yeah. And it very well could have been a translation, like something in the translation from Russian to English, but one being cause of death, one being maybe manner of death. But generally, it was through cold temperature or low temperature, violent, and accidental. Those were like the 3 common ones determined.
Interesting.
The missing skin is so weird.
Right? And a portion
like missing eyebrows.
Yeah, the eyebrows I'm not certain about, but it has been a couple months. It has been snowy, and it is now like springtime. So I don't know if like environmental factors had anything to do with that or if it could play a part. But I would have thought they'd be preserved almost in the cold temperatures and the snow. You wouldn't see a fast level of decomp to maybe warrant the skin around the face like decomposing at a different rate.
Yeah, unless it was some sort of like animal predation or something.
Yeah.
But
which is, keep that in mind. Zolotaryov had his missing eyebrows as well. Both of his eyes were missing, and 6 of his ribs were fractured. And the trauma to his ribs was said to have been caused by an effect of a high power impact to the chest, and he died as a result of violence.
Okay.
Interesting.
Right? And then you have Ludmila Dubinina. Her pants were very torn and burnt in places, supposedly. Her facial skull bones were exposed. Her eyes were also missing, along with parts of her upper lip, as well as her tongue was missing.
Okay.
She had severe bilateral fracturing to her rib cage, and the medical examiner believed her death was caused by massive hemorrhage into the right ventricle, multiple bilateral rib fractures, and internal bleeding into the thoracic cavity. Testimony was provided by forensic expert, and he believed that some of the injuries consisted, like specifically the thoracic injuries and some of the skull injuries, they were consistent with an impact of a car moving at high speeds, or they were similar to the type of trauma that results from the shockwave of a bomb.
Oh.
So very intense levels of force causing these injuries.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the case was closed and concluded, and that the cause of death was deemed overwhelming force, which they were not able to overcome. So
But what caused the force?
Yeah. So it seemed as though they closed it and just said nature did its thing. They were on a snowy, windy hill, mountain.
It was their time.
It just, they a peril that they couldn't avoid, essentially.
Okay.
This didn't satisfy
Not
some people.
suspicious.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
answer did not satisfy some people. And so a Russian government investigation was actually opened in 2019, aiming to finally resolve the mystery because so many theories had come out and people were like, there's no way that they just died from natural causes or the environment. They, in 2019, ended up concluding that an avalanche was the one that drove the hikers out from their tent. However, researchers had never documented an avalanche in the area that the camp was found. Not to say that it's not possible, but
Mhm.
it just seemed very unlikely. And I kind of go into it a little bit later.
Like, no offense to the Russian government, but I don't trust them to lead an honest and truthful investigation.
I agree. I agree.
It could have,
So
yeah, it could have very much been like, because avalanches are so loud that they could have heard one and thought it was closer, and then they were like rushing to get out of the tent, which is why they like cut out of it, I guess. But
Mhm.
that only explains that part,
Not the
Yeah.
because
injuries.
there's like no evidence really
And the thing
of
was,
an
too,
avalanche.
I won't get, actually, no, I'm not going to get ahead of myself, but we do have, an avalanche is a theory. And I do talk
Yeah.
about kind of some yays and nays to the theory in a little bit.
Okay.
But researchers were supposedly, you're going to love this journey, so impressed by the depictions of snow in Disney's 2013 Frozen that the
Okay.
researchers asked the creators for the animation code so they could run their own simulations. So they
Oh my
supposedly,
gosh.
so they supposedly took data from the 1970s General Motors cadaver tests that were conducted on like impact trauma with cars, pairing it
Okay.
with the snow wind simulation that they had created for Frozen. And they determined, because of this, that it demonstrated that heavy blocks of solid snow could have landed on the hikers, causing injuries not typically seen with avalanches.
Right.
But that doesn't. But how?
So their theory right now is that Marshmallow, the giant snow creature from Frozen, threw them off a cliff like Anna and Kristoff and Olaf, and that is what happened to them.
And that's why their eyes are missing, and that's why their clothes are missing, and that's
I
all
see no
covered in
flaws.
fractured.
I like
Yeah.
it. I'm here for it.
And I don't know if it, like, my interpretation is that they're like obviously interested in the wind and like Elsa's movement of the snow,
Mhm.
but you still wouldn't see that really. Like, I feel like it's not an explanation for what's happening, or not really comparable to what possibly could have happened on the mountainside.
I don't feel like I have a great enough understanding of what it takes to animate snow and how impressive that might be, and how that could even apply to this sort of research.
And I would also like to know what went into the animation of snow. Are they using actual data and weather patterns and whatever to animate this movement of snow? Or did the researchers see the animations and go, yeah, that seems accurate, and then use that as a basis, you know?
Yeah.
I will say that Disney is like revolutionary
Yeah.
in terms of developing new like animation stuff. Like I think for Moana, they developed a new way to like animate water that is like I don't remember the whole story, but like scientists consider it like one of the most accurate like animated depictions of water and shit like that. So I feel like it's possible that this like whatever animation, however they made those animations, would be somewhat useful at least on like a real scale.
Yeah. I'm definitely
Yeah.
not discrediting it. Like, obviously, work
Oh
goes
yeah.
into it, but I would just like to
Oh
know
yeah.
the data used to create the simulation tool, right? Like, and the program and the code or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so that's kind of what there is. But I wanted to go over some theories because there's just like strange things that don't line up. But to recap, essentially, 9 hikers died in a mysterious way on the side of a mountain weird injuries, don't really line up with avalanche activity, and seems like they left in a hurry, single file, and they all died in like weird ways. Plus, radiation was found. Odd. Okay. First theory, it was a military cover-up and or radiation fallout from secret weapon tests.
All right. Fair enough.
I feel like that's plausible.
So, folks that were initially investigating these deaths supposedly closed the case due to pressure from their superiors. They ended up coming out decades later, sharing this information. I don't know the accuracy. It's all coming from them, so it could be nothing. But it was also said that the makeshift morgue where the first 4 bodies were examined were supposedly surrounded by KGB security officers rather than like police or just security. And nobody was allowed access to it, which I can kind of understand. Like, obviously, you want to keep chain of custody, people limited, whatever.
Yeah.
Many animals, including birds, were found dead at the time of the student's death in and around the area, and local people were suddenly banned from using well water around that time.
Oh, that's weird. That's a weird coincidence.
Yeah.
And a gentleman was interviewed later on. This was back in like 2019, but he was 12 at the time of the incident and had gone to the open casket funerals for some of these hikers. And he truly believes that the students were victims of a military experiment and that their corpses were then returned to their camp and rearranged to make it look like they froze to death. So that everything was kind of staged there.
Right.
Interesting.
That makes sense, especially with the livor mortis, though.
Yeah.
True.
This being said, though, others kind of said if they were part of some experiment, there's no way the military would have let civilians, friends, families go and search for them and join the search party. I feel like they would be a bit more hesitant in allowing who came and went for that.
Yeah, but I also feel like it's a really good cover-up in that if they didn't let them search for it, that would look weirder than letting them search for it, especially if they had arranged everyone to look like they had frozen to death and moved all the bodies and kind of set the scene a little bit.
Yeah, because it was like over a week past February 12th when they were supposed to be home that the search started, right?
Yeah.
So there's like, there would have definitely been time to do what they needed.
Just to do something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Another theory. In the area, there was there are still the indigenous Mansi peoples. They've survived over centuries through hunting, fishing, and reindeer herding. The theory is that they are the ones that killed the hikers. One crazy theory, I don't put much stock into it, but apparently some Mansi people had taken psychedelic mushrooms or some form of psychedelics. They were in a state that when they saw the hikers in the area, murdered them because they were on sacred ground. This feels so far-fetched to me. I don't think that's the case.
That just feels like using racism.
Yeah, exactly.
As a cover-up.
Yeah, exactly. Because there was nothing to prove that the Mansi people had done this. There was no incriminating evidence, and the investigators ended up returning to these villages asking for help. And it was with the help of Mansi individuals that they were able to locate the remaining 4 skiers.
Wow.
Yeah, because I guess they were familiar with the area too.
It's true.
And the documents that I had seen to close the case noted that the Mansi people were friendly, and the area that the hikers had died in was actually considered unfit for hunting and reindeer breeding in the winter. So it wouldn't really make sense as to why they'd be out and about in that area. Another theory, as per all unusual things, are UFOs and aliens.
Naturally.
Classic. Yeah. In an interview, though, a Mansi woman recalls noticing something strange in the sky at the time of the event as she was heading back to her village from the forest after collecting some firewood. And she goes to say, quote, "This bright burning object appeared. It was wider at the front and narrower at the back with a tail, and there were sparks flying off of it," end quote. An individual working the case, who was also told to like close the case by his superiors, he would come out decades later again and share that he also remembers receiving several reports about balls of fire in the sky at the time. However, he had been ordered to classify his findings and forget about them.
Classic.
The whole like government cover up testing weapons is making a little bit more sense.
Right? I truly think weapons may have been involved in this.
Yeah, because it really does feel like they heard something coming, they cut themselves out of the tent, only to get hit by this bomb of radioactive something. And then when the government or whatever discovered them or like saw where the bomb landed or whatever, just put on clothes, and that's why they were in different clothes and staged their bodies to make it look like just a hiking trip gone wrong.
And another thing too that I didn't add into this, but samples had been taken from some of the bodies of their internal organs for testing, and I guess when the results came back, the samples just disappeared and the results were destroyed.
Oh, I hate that.
Surprise. Surprise.
So, yeah, I don't know.
That sucks.
And while it's possible by the description for it to maybe have been a comet, the woman had mentioned that the village elders also had witnessed the event and they warned it as a bad omen at the time. Maybe a meteorological event. I don't really know. If multiple people had witnessed this, I don't know if it's one comet, multiple comets, I don't know. But in 2019, during that same interview with a journalist, the Mansi forest warden, he had also told the journalist that the reindeer herders at the time had been banned from the area and hunting wasn't allowed for 4 years after the incident in that general area.
Yikes.
That's a bit weird.
So I'm like,
That's very weird.
Why would that happen?
Why are we suddenly concerned with this specific area?
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know if it was because of like looking for the bodies, but I mean, they were found months after. So I don't know if an investigation was still happening in the area, but not for 4 years. I would anticipate maybe 6 months to a year, but not 4 years.
Yeah.
Another theory was a slab avalanche. And as we were kind of talking about, though, there was quite a bit of contradictory evidence. There were no obvious signs of reported avalanche activity by the search team. So it didn't seem like an avalanche had come down, covered everything. There was just nothing reported by them. The slope in the area of the camp didn't appear or wasn't sufficiently steep enough for an avalanche to occur. So I guess anything over 30 degrees is like probable avalanche material, but the slope at the time was under 30 degrees. So they seemed that it may have been unlikely to be the case. And like we talked about, the injury scene, especially the thoracic and skull injuries, weren't typical of avalanche victims.
Yeah, I also feel like the tent maybe would have shown some evidence of being caught in an avalanche. Their bodies, the way they were laid out, like everything.
Yep, I agree. Dubinina's missing eyes and tongues were also attributed to scavengers. This kind of makes sense as her body laid out undiscovered for 3 months. But that being said, it also seemed like all of their bodies were under 4 to 4.5 meters of snow. So I'm like, what scavengers are getting to you at that time?
Unless like they had gotten eaten before it had snowed that much, or like but it's also weird that it was only eyes and tongue and nowhere else on the body showed any sort of scavenging, I guess.
Right? I agree.
Yeah, that is very bizarre.
And while there are like many, many, many theories, I wanted to mention this one too because it's kind of on theme, but another theory was that a Russian Yeti got to them. And I think this was largely attributed to one of the photos that was found and developed on the camera. I'll show that in a second, and it also because of the extensive like blunt force trauma injuries. But in all of the photos that were found, this was taken, and I'll post it. We'll put it on our sources. So this was a photo completely undoctored, taken on their cameras, and yeah.
That's really
developed.
spooky.
So it is grainy, of course, as they all are. It very well maybe could be someone in all of their snow gear at the end of a trail, but it does look like there had been a trail kind of carved out in the snow. Buddy's at the end of it. He does look quite large. I don't really know. This is
He's
where
got that classic Bigfoot stance.
yeah, like mid-walk kind of thing, mid-step. And another one too, I didn't actually grab any of the photos of it, but there were also photos of like weird light situations happening on the camera, which I think kind of attributes to the light seen in the sky at the time. I don't know if it was a develop issue of the camera, like something happened in the film during the time that the bodies had been missing and the rescuers got to them and developed it. I don't really know, but there were some just odd photos that had come from it all.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I will say though, the photo before this one is also titled Yeti, and it's obviously one of the people. So I wonder, like, if it was just them being funny.
Oh, them a little hee hee ha ha moment.
Yeah. Because while that does look like a Yeti, the picture, like, before it makes me think that they were just being funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see that too.
Yeah.
It's just someone, yeah. But that being said too, it being titled Yeti could just be like the person on the website who's uploading it.
Yeah.
That's true.
But it does look like the hood matches the hood in the Yeti photo.
Yeah, because it's like, it's titled 3_16 Halt in the Forest, January 29th, Thibaut Brignol, Yeti. And that's titled for both of them.
Interesting.
So that's my only thing. Like, yes, it looks really Yeti, but I also kind of wonder if they were just messing around.
Gotta put our skeptic glasses on.
Yeah.
Because,
but it's not white, so it could be the Yeti.
Right?
True. That's true.
Yeah, because there's multiple photos of Thibaut Brignol, like Nikolai, I think his name was, titled his name on it too, prior to the Yeti photo. And it was at the end of his camera roll, it seems.
Oh, I didn't realize there was actual images of like their bodies and
stuff,
how they were found. Oh, wow.
Like images of everything, of that search, their cameras.
That's really interesting. Okay, that's a rabbit hole I don't need to go down at the moment.
I do recommend at some point, though, looking.
Oh, yeah. It's probably going to be once we're done. I just don't want to take up too much of our time, me just scrolling going, oh, wow.
Yeah. But yeah, because of that photo, that's everyone's like, it's a Yeti. It has to be a Yeti. My assumption is they didn't have access to all of the photos, so they're very much taking it out of context.
Yeah.
But throwing that in there because we talked about Bigfoot and the Yeti from there.
Crazy. I love that all three of our cases were kind of tied together.
Yeah, I feel like
I was just gonna say that. Like, we all picked them completely independently, and they all kind of have like a couple little threads that tie them together.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's a lot of fun. Well, thank you both for these super interesting discussions on theories and weird conspiracies. I love these episodes. They're so fun to record, and I love when we all do a little different thing and finding the connections between them.
Yeah,
it's very fun. With that being said, next episode, we are going to be covering CIA black sites, which feels a little bit nerve-wracking to cover given the state of the states, but it's an interesting one. So tune in. It is quite intriguing. If you want to follow us on social media, you want to catch up with what we're doing, you can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok, all at What the Forensics. Or you can go to our website. It's our one-stop shop for everything forensics and us. That's whattheforensics.ca. We'll also be posting our sources and our source images that we've been discussing throughout the episode there. Or if you want to contact us directly, you can use the contact form on our website or email us at whattheforensics@gmail.com. So this has been another episode, a very exciting 100th episode of What the Forensics. Thank you guys again to our listeners and anyone that has come along on this journey with us, whether this is your first time or whether you've listened to every one of them. We are just so grateful that we get to do this, and we really appreciate you guys. So we hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Just a reminder to everyone that we are not professionals in the forensic science field. We are just interested in forensics and want to share what we are learning with our listeners. We're trying to give you the most accurate information, but we are human and can make mistakes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next week.